Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 26th of February of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And this video we'd like to continue our topic about small military coup that took place today in Kiev. I'll remind you that today, according to information we have, Ukrainian's parliament, including the opposition, voted anonymously to affirm that Zelenskyy's mandate as a president remains legitimate, that no elections can be held because of a war started by Putin, and that a general election will be held as soon as the war ends. So let's discuss the same statement, but with the comment by Elon Musk. Today he commented this statement, this situation in his social network. The Ukrainian parliament passes a resolution affirming Zelensky's legitimacy, the constitutionally mandated requirement that keeps him in power through the duration of the war due to the martial law. So that resolution was adopted by the Ukrainian parliament. So what is this? Basically, this is a small military coup. This is the coup when we see that the main actors haven't been changed. We're talking about parliament and Zelensky himself, but we see that their legal power and the legal status have been changed. What does it mean? First of all, during the previous video, we were talking that every single constitution, including the Ukrainian constitution, have a very important paragraph, a very important part related to a source of power. Who is the source of this or that power? And according to the Ukrainian constitution, only people who are living on the territory of Ukraine, who has Ukrainian citizenship, is the only source of power, which means only people in Ukraine can determine whether you are president or not, when your presidency should start and when your presidency should be ended. Only the people of Ukraine can make this decision. And by this law that was adopted by the Ukrainian parliament, we see that there is a first crime, a constitutional crime of Ukraine. And I'm talking that the parliament of Ukraine recognized itself as a source of power. So according to the constitution, understanding of the source of power. And they're saying that not the people of Ukraine should determine whether Zelensky is a legal president or not, but we, the parliament, are doing this. And this is the first crime that was committed today by the Ukrainian parliament. But the problem is that you may ask whether there are no real legal option for Zelensky to continue being a president, whether there are no legal action, legal way how Zelensky can save his power with all these things, without all these constitutional crimes. And I'll tell you that there is one and simple way how Zelensky can stay as a president as long as possible during martial law. So let's discuss this way in details, and we got lots of very important things about this. First of all, Ukrainian parliament is, of course, a part of power. You know that there are three parts of powers. There is a court power, there is a executor power, and there is lawmaker power. I believe you understand what I'm trying to tell you. So when talking about Ukrainian parliament, this is lawmaker power. So they're making laws, they're adopting laws. Zelensky is executing power. And there is another power, the third one is court power. When talking about court, there are two main courts in Ukraine, the main court of Ukraine and constitutional court of Ukraine. And you know, Zelensky have possibilities to go to these courts and to ask the judge, for example, of the constitutional court whether he's a legal president or not. And for example, if a head of constitutional court make a paper that he's a legal president, then Zelensky would have no problems with this. He can, with this paper, he can do whatever he can sign papers with Trump, with Russia. He can do whatever he likes. But the problem that's Ukraine and Zelensky himself has lots of problems with this, let's say, type of force, or type of power. And we have a lot of details about the situation that we received from the president of Putin during his statements on the December 16th. So let's discuss what exactly Putin told us about the problem, about the conflict in Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke about the actions of the Kiev authorities in relations to the heads of the Supreme and Constitutional Courts. So calling them signs of loss of statehood. This regime is obviously losing the signs of statehood. When we talk about legitimacy, what I mean is they didn't go to the elections, the constitution does not allow for any extension of powers, and where are the Supreme and Constitutional Courts? A legitimate question. The chairman of the Supreme Court is in prison. No one is talking about this, but he was put behind bars. The head of the state said at an extended meeting of the board of the Russian Defense Ministry. Furthermore, Putin noted that the head of the Constitutional Court of Ukraine has stopped being allowed to work by security. In the end, the Constitutional Court as a whole was paralyzed, and the chairman went abroad, where he is provided with security since there is a threat to his life. So you understand that Zelensky can't do this because he have a very great fight with two heads of two main important courts, Supreme Court and Constitutional Court. Once again, the head of the Supreme Court is in jail. He was jailed by Zelensky, and the head of the Constitutional Court is abroad, not on the territory of Ukraine. He is under protection of some probably Western country. Maybe he's in Slovakia, maybe he's in Hungary, maybe he's in Russia. We don't know for sure, but obviously he's not going to return back to Ukraine. And the most important, when war finishes and if the Russians are able to take everything under their control, obviously this head of the Constitutional Court can return back to the territory of Ukraine and can cancel every single decision and every single paper that was signed by Zelensky. So that's why Zelensky was he was searching, he was seeking for some solution. How can he sign a paper with Trump? Because if he signs something with Trump, basically Trump will be forced to follow his signature, because Zelensky signs a 500 billion agreement, and obviously there is no other way, no other let's say approach for Trump but to support Zelensky until the end, because if he loses, the next president or the next powers of Ukraine will reject every single paper signed by Zelensky. So that's why Zelensky found very simple solution. He forced the parliament of Ukraine to call him a legitimate president. But they can't do this because it's not the sphere of their responsibilities. The Ukraine parliament is responsible just for making laws, but not for judging and making conclusions based on this matter. So this is very important. So that's why this morning we were talking that the US and Ukraine found a solution how to sign agreements, and then we had have the report that Zelensky was planning to go to Washington on the 28th of February, and he was forced, and he was planning to sign this agreement together with Trump. But today we got a very important statement made by the Ukrainian side that this agreement between US and between Ukraine will be signed at the ministerial level, not at the presidency level, but at the ministerial level. For example, by the Ministry of Resources of Ukraine and by the Secretary of State or Treasury Secretary of the United States of America, which obviously is not something that can be recognized in the future as well, but at least this is going to be more or less legal signature signed by peoples that has no responsibility, has no legal power, at least from the Ukrainian side. So this paper, this signature doesn't mean anything, but for Trump it means that he will not recognize Zelensky. Let's discuss additional more statements. The deal to be signed at ministerial level, no ratifications needed. So this is also very important that the Parliament of Ukraine will not ratify this. Minerals deal with the US is a framework agreement with further agreement to set up a fund to follow. I want to discuss with Trump the possibility to use Russia's frozen assets for mining resources, development, weapons purchase, reconstruction. I can't yet confirm Washington trip on Friday. Teams are working on it. Most likely the trip is not going to happen. There is no debt to be repaid to the US in the wording of minerals deal. But so very interesting statements. As you can see, we see that most likely there are going to be no solution. Furthermore, according to information we have, the next days there are going to be another meeting between the representatives of the United States of America and the representatives of Russia on the territory of Turkey. This is going to be the second round of negotiations where the parties are going to try to find a solution how to remove barriers that they managed to found during the previous 2 weeks. There will be no cessation of hostilities in Ukraine along the contact line. We have a constitution that was stated by the Minister of the Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov. Other statements made by the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry. What remains remains of Ukraine must be freed from racist laws. There were no specific disclosures on frozen Russian assets. Inviting foreign investors to projects in the Russian Federation implies the entire territory of the country according to the constitution. We are waiting for Europe to stop lying about Russians blocking negotiations. Russia believes that it is impossible to enter into agreements that will involve pumping Ukraine with weapons again. So as you can see, during even this article, Lavrov was talking about constitution also too many times. And according to him, and when talking about Russian constitution, for example, everything that you can see inside of these black territories is the territories that the Russians considered as a part of Russian constitution. We are talking about the territory in Kherson region that is located under complete Ukraine control. We are talking about the city of Zaporozhye and the northern Zaporozhye itself. We are talking about the rest of Donetsk People's Republic or Donetsk region. All these territories, according to Russia, are the part of Russian Federation. And when talking about different deals, including mineral deals, the Russians are saying that when talking about mineral resources on these territories, these first of all resources belong to Russia. And the second thing, that there should be no sanctions, no restrictions, no limits between Russia and the United States of America to develop and to get these resources from the surface. So these are the statements of Sergei Lavrov. Anyway, the situation is very interesting and difficult, and the most important that we see that Zelensky is trying to find a solution, but we see that as for now he can't get any. Now let's discuss the situation on the line of combat contact, and first let's talk about the Sudzha direction. Today the Russians published another video on how, as a result of reconnaissance operation, they managed to discover the positions of the Ukrainian air defense systems, and as a result of Tornado S or Iskander strike, this deployment point of Ukraine air defense system was completely destroyed. This is not the first strike from this area. Several days ago, also in February, almost from the same area, we got another video, but this time the Russians on the 18th of February, so almost a week ago, managed to discover the concentration of Ukraine multiple launch rocket systems that Ukrainians were planning to use, maybe to organize another offensive operation in the Sudzha direction. But when the Russians managed to discover this concentration of forces, the Russians destroyed it. So as you can see, Ukrainians have a lot of problems. First, they can't bring their units, reinforcements, and different, let's say, brigades on the territory of Sudzha because the main roads are under complete Russian FPV and artillery control, and the Ukrainians can't bring air defense systems and, for example, multiple launch rocket systems very close to the line of combat contact because the Russians control the territory, and if they see something, they destroy it immediately. So lots of problems, the Ukrainians suffer losses, and this is the reason, this is one of the reasons why the Ukrainians today left several settlements in the most northern part of the Sudzha pocket. According to information we have, the Russians managed to secure completely the settlement of Pohrebky and the settlement of Orlovka. So we have colored these territories in Russian favor. We have, yesterday we had a video how the Russian soldiers were waving their flags in the most central part, let's say on the roof of the local school. And today we got the report from the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation. So based on these two reports, these two proofs, we have adjusted the map. Furthermore, according to neutral mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions a bit further in the southern direction and to take several tree lines under complete control. Also, during the day, several pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to enter both the settlement of Novaya Sorochina and that the Russians managed to enter the settlement of Staraya Sorochina. But later, during the day, the same Russian resources reported that those updates were just speculations and fakes. So based on this, we will adjust the map before the next video. Now let's move further. Also very important updates are coming from the settlement of Sverdlikova. I'll remind you that during the previous several days we've been receiving a lot of updates that the Russians began another offensive operation in this area with the purpose to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Lebedevka. There were very heavy clashes for the previous several days, and as a result of those clashes, according to information we have, the Ukrainians were completely defeated and they were forced to fall back towards the southeastern part of the settlement or even further in the direction of the settlement of Kazachya Loknya. As for this area, the Russians published lots of videos how they were destroying Ukrainian vehicles. So these days we got lots of videos, and most of them are coming from the main supply lines. The Russians control the main arterials in this area. The weather is perfect for the Russian FPV drones. Ukrainians understand that for them it's very difficult to move and redeploy their forces from one settlement to another because the Russians see everything, and as soon as anything appears on the lines, on the roads, the Russians destroy them within the next several minutes. minutes. So hundreds of drones, Russian drones, are flying. So that's why there is just one option for the Ukrainians for the next several weeks, is to abandon their positions in the settlements like Male, Lokny, in these fields along the railways. And the only possible solution for the Ukrainians is to stick as close as possible to the city of Sudzha and to try to give a final battle around this settlement, with the purpose, probably, let's say, to slow down the Russians a bit for another month. But if the Ukrainians do this, we understand that it's going to be just several days before the entire Sudzha direction falls. As for now, the Ukrainians, it's very difficult to explain soldiers that they need to retreat, that it's just retreat and regrouping process, because anytime they start, let's say, abandoning their positions, a real panic can cover the Ukrainians, and the entire retreat process can lead to a collapse of Ukrainian lines and can lead to entrance of the armored forces of Russian Federation on the territory of Sumy region, which is obviously unacceptable for Zelensky and for the head of Ukrainian army, Syrsky. In this video, we got another, let's say, attempt from the Russian side to destroy the temporary deployment point of the armored forces of Ukraine in the settlement of Guiva. As for this part of Sudzha direction, since the beginning of month, we got at least 5 or 6 geolocations with Russian FAB 3000, how the Russians were bombing and attacking the deployment points of the Ukrainian forces, which means that most likely the Guiva-Kurilovka line is going to be the area of a primary Russian attack with the purpose to cut the Ukrainians completely from supply. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupiansk direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of videos of how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian positions on the territory of the settlement of Kutkovka. So yesterday in the evening, several pro-Russian resources reported that the Russians have begun offensive operation in the direction of this settlement. Today we start receiving first geolocations how the Russians were destroying the temporary deployment points and FPV drone positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in this area with the use of Lemur missile. As for now, we don't know for sure whether the Russians indeed have launched offensive operation in this area, but obviously we can say that this settlement is the next target of the armored forces of Russian Federation in this direction. But obviously another thing we can say that this is the first settlement where the Ukrainians most likely will try to show the Russians at least some resistance. Now let's discuss the situation from the central Kupiansk direction. You know that during late summer and early autumn, this direction was probably the biggest problem for the armored forces of Ukraine. The Russians were advancing, and as a result of summer offensive operation, early autumn offensive operation, the Russians managed to cut this territory in two by taking under control the settlement of Kruglakovka. So that was obviously the significant progress of the Russians, and then we start waiting what the Russians were planning to do next. But the problem is, and the thing is, that the Russians, since the early autumn till the let's say late early March, haven't shown us anything in this area. And it's not because the Russians don't know what to do, or this direction currently is not a primary target or not a primary task for the armored forces of Russian Federation. Basically, the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the situation in this area. They managed to concentrate a lot of units, and the Russians during the previous days tried to make several attempts to attack. For those purposes, the Russians were using a lot of vehicles, but as you can see, according to this map, most of the vehicles, most of the forces of the armored forces of Russian Federation didn't manage to reach the line of combat contact. Most of their vehicles and convoys were burned in the fields and very far from the line of combat contact. As for now, based on this, we can make a conclusion that currently the Russians don't have possibilities to bring their forces close to the settlements of Zelenyy Gай, Borisovka, Andreevka, Novoplatonovka. The only thing that the Russians can do is to attack Ukrainian positions using just infantry through the tree lines. But obviously this is very slow process, and this is very dangerous. It's too dangerous process. As for the southern Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians continue destroying and attacking the Ukrainian vehicles and units in the area of Zarechno-Tarskoye. I'll remind you that since yesterday we start receiving a lot of updates how the Russians were attacking and bombing and FPV droning the Ukrainians in this part, most likely preparing themselves before a major offensive operation in the direction of this village of Tarskoye. If we increase the numbers of days since, let's say, the beginning of this week, we're gonna see lots of icons exactly in this area. So this territory is already under complete Russian FPV drone control, and the main purpose of this control is to cut the settlement of Tarskoye from the mainland. We can't say for sure when exactly the Russians are planning to begin their final assault operation, but obviously we can start counting days. Now let's discuss the situation in the Chasiv Yar direction. We have lots of icons, but without any changes on the ground. The Russians continue their clearing operation, they're bombing everything they see. There are lots of buildings, lots of industrial zones, lots of different complex network of the fortifications that the Russians need to destroy before another offensive. So that's why the Russians are in normal process. But the thing is that Ukrainians understand that very soon the Russians will begin their major offensive with the purpose to break through Ukrainian positions and to take the city of Konstantinovka. So that's why the Ukrainians try to counterattack with the purpose to understand and to test Russian positions. For example, one of the Ukrainian counterattack took place in the northern part of Toretsk. Today we have adjusted the map. Now we have no doubts that Ukrainians, as a result of counter-offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the territories around Stadium. This information was provided and confirmed by neutral mappers and by geolocations. In this video, we can see exactly the moment when the Ukrainians answered the central part, landed infantry, and were attacking this building. So this is we are not saying that the Russians will not be able to restore control over these territories, but obviously it will take time. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. Today we had lots of talks, lots of disputes regarding the settlement of Kotlina. Today, pro-Ukrainian sources, Deep State, published another changes on their maps where they stated that as a result of offensive operation or counter-offensive operation, the settlement of Kotlina was completely recaptured by the Ukrainians, by the paratroopers from the 25th Airborne Brigade. So we don't know for sure whether this information is true or not. Of course, we have turned this area as a contested area because we have some rules and so on, but telling the truth, very difficult to understand what exactly happened there. The thing is that the last reports from the Russian side we got that confirmed the Russian presence in this area got on the 3rd of February, so almost a month ago. So obviously during the previous months the Ukrainians maybe had some chances to counterattack and to restore positions that they lost during the Russian offensive in the late December. So as for now, we are keeping this area as is, as a contested area, until we get additional proofs. Now let's move further. And let's discuss the situation in the Novopavlivka direction. Today, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to continue semi-encirclement of the settlement of Preobrazhenka. As for the Mirny direction, Kamar direction, or Bogatyr direction, today the Russians managed to finish the battle, to finish the clearing operation of the settlement of Andreevka. We have lots of videos that confirm Russian presence in the most northwestern and the southwestern part of this small village. Today, pro-Ukrainian sources also published very interesting article regarding Novopavlivka direction. Novopavlivka is the settlement that located already on the territory of the Dnipro region. So let's discuss this article in details. The Russian armed forces are increasing their forces and resources, regrouping, planning a major offensive. We drew attention to the fact that the main goal is to enter the territory of Dnipropetrovsk region. The personnel and motivated by the military political leadership, 3 directions are planned: Udachna, Nova Підгороднє, Preobrazhenka, Novopavlovka, Novosilka, Novodarevka, lying in the direction of Ternova. On the eve of the final agreements, any territorial acquisitions can become a trump card in the negotiations. So this is the very difficult situation. We see that the Russians are trying to break through, and maybe this is the reason why the Russians stopped any offensive in the area of Pokrovsk, Toretsk, because they understand that these directions are not the primary and important for the Russians. Now they want to get and to enter the Dnipro region. Maybe this will allow the Russians to have some legal rights for this territory as well. Very difficult to understand, but this direction is the primary for the Russians, and they're going to continue developing this area in their favor. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds me, condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.